Okay, here we are. Welcome. I wanted to very quickly share what's new with BuzzBooks. So the first thing is that we are all about discovery. And in doing that, I hope everyone has had a chance to download your edition. But most importantly, I just wanted to tell you that we have hundreds of 5-star reviews on NetGalley, and we have so many call outs with people telling us about the titles that they have been discovering. And it has been really fun. And it is so great that I also wanted to share this. This is the word cloud that comes up on the back end of NetGalley when it just sort of shows what people's reactions are. And to me, it's everyone is discovering things. I also wanted to show you these beautiful social media cards that we've made that all our authors have and that you may have seen on Instagram or on Substack or LinkedIn or anywhere where people are sharing them. And 2 weeks ago was Pub Day for our edition, and we celebrated with a full day of great discovery and things on our Instagram, Substack, and our panel. And so many of the publishers and authors spread the word that we are very excited about it. And we have more coming. We have so much great material from our authors, and we're going to be creating assets out of those and sharing them with you all. So hopefully we can keep the conversation going. Hashtag BuzzBooksOfficial. This is our new edition, which you can get on NetGalley, where you can see all of the publishers' plans, as well as anywhere you get your ebooks. And I want to make sure everyone remembers to stay until the end, because we are going to be giving away several sets of galleys, which the publishers have shared with us. So stay until the end. These are our selections in the book. This is just the first page, though. So look how beautiful that is. And here's the second page. And here is the last page. You can see all of these on our Substack. We'll be sending them out again. You'll see them on social media as well. So don't worry. I know it's hard to see them all very quickly here. I know if we haven't done it already, we're posting links. I also just want to say a very quick thank you to our partners who help us put this edition together. Thank you so much. And finally, here are the books and authors we will be talking about tonight. I'm really excited for the conversation that we're about to have.
Sarah, I'm so happy that we get the chance to talk about your book.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, doing it over a Zoom call with a whole heap of other people.
Yeah. Well, I will dive right in. My first question for you is, this is a book that grapples with a big topic. It's grappling with the idea of civilizational collapse, that our world as we know it is in the process of collapse. Was there a specific experience or moment that made you want to explore this idea?
I don't think anyone wants to explore this idea if they've got their sense about them. It was really, it's such a big topic and it's a really difficult topic. My dad calls it Sarah's book of absolutely everything. And as you know, Amy, as my publisher and editor, it really does encompass pretty much everything that's happening in the world today. What I was observing, I have a large social media community across Substack, Facebook, Instagram of about 500,000 people, and as well as a podcast. And so I was having all of these conversations about what's happening in the world. And I've been a climate activist for a long time. My most recent book, This One Wild and Precious Life, covered the climate crisis and provided a philosophical and spiritual kind of lens to it all. But there was AI happening, there was political fragmentation, there was talk of fascism arriving, the tech bros were causing havoc, but then of course there was fertility collapse, and there was all these things happening at once, and people were feeling rightly overwhelmed and really didn't know how to fathom why all of this was happening right now and all at the same time. And I was sort of burying down into kind of meta-crisis discussions. I was talking to energy futurists. I was talking to various philosophers, neuroscientists. And what I was realizing is that this topic, this idea of there being a meta crisis, a crisis of all the things happening at once, which is also the crisis of our inability to solve it, but also is the mentality that caused all of this in the first place. It was being discussed in academic circles, right? And it really made a lot of sense and provided a lot of comfort to me because nothing was making sense in the rest of the world. But nobody was finding a way to talk about it to the everyday person with kids and a mortgage and, a job that they've got to get to. And so this is what I've done all my life, Amy, as you know, is take complex subjects that are generally talked about in rarefied, academic circles and try to bring them to the everyday reader, the everyday person who's so busy and doesn't have the time to investigate it themselves. So that's how I came about it, was just observing what was happening in the world, feeling into the felt experience of everyone's overwhelm. And I knew that if people could understand that there is actually a singular phenomenon behind the whole lot, then we can start to piece our way through it and forgive ourselves, forgive each other, and calm down and find a rational, sane, but also heartfelt way to navigate our way through all of this. So yeah, that's the background to it. No singular event, but that's the point, isn't it? It was everything all at once that kind of prompted the writing of this book.
Yeah, I love that. And I saw someone asked in the chat too if we could hold up the book. We don't have galleys yet, but we do have a beautiful cover.
I will just explain the title, I Eat the Stars. It comes from a Rebecca Elson poem. She was a NASA astronomer and also a poet, and she developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And at the age of 37, and as she was sort of dying from this cancer, she wrote a book of poetry called A Responsibility to Awe. And I'm sure, given that most of you are book people, you've probably heard of this book. It's a beautiful book of poetry. And one of the poems starts with, as an antidote to fear of death, I eat the stars. And I'm sure most of you can work out the sort of the meaning and the sense behind that. When we're faced with something so overwhelmingly fearful, the best antidote is to eat up life, to live now. And of course, philosophers and spiritualists throughout the ages have advised this. And so that is really the theme of the book overall.
I love that. And so another question I wanted to ask you about was sort of the writing process for this book, because it came about in a really unusual way. You wrote it originally chapter by chapter in real time as a serialization on Substack. And it wasn't until you finished the whole series that you sought a traditional publisher. And so I think what I've been curious about is, do you think the manuscript would be the same if you had written it in a more traditional way? Or do you feel like this process of writing it in community with others shaped how the book ultimately turned out?
Oh, absolutely. And in the acknowledgements, and my thank you at the front of the book, it's thank you to my Substack community. So it really started out as a conversation. I have always written books listening to where people are at. I come from mainstream media. I was the editor of Cosmopolitan. I hosted MasterChef Australia. I worked for the Murdoch Press. And I've always listened to where the mainstream is at. And so this book really informed me chapter by chapter where people were at, what they were struggling with, what they wanted to know more about, what was hurting them the most. And so it was wonderful for making sure that I was on track and attending to exactly where people are at and what they're needing to know. And I was able to push the boundaries because they wanted to be pushed. They wanted to know about the deep science, the energy futurist perspective. They wanted to know all of this. There was that. But at the same time, it was great as a writer because each week I had a deadline. It was, I wrote this book faster than any other book I've written in my life. Now, I did research for 3 years before I started writing. So there was a lot of research done. I interviewed over 200 experts to, sort of arrive at what I felt was a point and a thesis. But no, this would be a very different book. And for people listening, which is everyone here, I essentially bring in the community, the Substack readers and subscribers' thoughts and questions. So the book in its paper and font version of things also reads like a conversation. And I do that with all of my books. I write in a conversational way so that people feel that their thoughts, they can see them recognized by other people. They feel less alone in their overwhelm. And as you know, Amy, I've always, with all of my books, put margins, wide margins on all of my books. And they're designed for people to write in the margins, their thoughts. And there's a bit of a legacy with my books where people then go and pass the book along to their friends. And there's this kind of, legacy or there's these sort of these notations where people can feel less and less alone because it's like, that's what I thought. That's the question I want to ask right now. So yes, the Substack experience is brought into the print version as well, which is a bit strange, but hopefully it'll work.
Yeah, I love the way that I think we planned it on kind of how to weave in those Substack comments. And so the last question I have for you is about, in one of the earliest chapters in the book, you talk about how we need to let go of hope. And this is obviously a very hard pill to swallow for most of us. And so I wanted to ask you about what we can look forward to when we let go of hope. Are there things that we can look forward to as we navigate a collapsing world?
Yeah, this chapter took me months. It's the first chapter. And it took me months and months to get it out of my heart because it broke my heart, to write it. And I'm teary thinking about it now. And I had to talk to my family about it. My family are climate activists. Essentially, what I was seeing is that we were clinging to hope as though there was this idea of somebody out there who would magically come and save us, that especially with the climate crisis, that, the energy transition would work and we'd meet these, IPCC deadlines. And the fact of the matter is, every year that was going past, and as we watch more and more climate calamities come about, it wasn't stacking up. What people were telling us, if we fight now, we'll make it. And yet a year and another year were going past and we weren't fighting and we weren't rallying together and the governments weren't doing what they promised to do. And the situation was getting worse. And we overstepped planetary boundaries, all kinds of limitations, and it was looking ridiculous. And what I was seeing is that it was creating a cognitive dissonance in people that was making them very, very hard. It was making it very, very hard for them to face what was going on and then prepare themselves and their children in particular for what was going on, which is hard times ahead. Now, humans do hard times, but we need to have the truth laid out in front of us by leaders who then help us navigate these harsh realities. So hope was holding us back from that. And I went back through history and found some wonderful quotes from various people that essentially said that true hope, the hope where we let go of this kind of optimistic outlook, but where we basically believe in a stunning possibility. We believe in the idea that this will make sense. And so I really explore all of this. And what I arrive at is that truth is ultimately what we're needing right now. Once we have truth, we can rise into our best selves. We can rise into our full maturity. And we can do this kind of, and I don't want to give away the ending, and Amy, you'll kill me if I give away the ending, but essentially there's this journey that I go on and we do a full circle, we come back around and, I'm sort of holding the reader's hand as we go through these explanations of Moloch and game theory and the meta crisis and all of this kind of thing, an exploration of life and death. And we come out at this idea that ultimately what collapse is doing, as it has done throughout history, is bringing us back to our humanness. It's a homecoming. It's a journey or a story of a homecoming. And what we're coming home to is our full humanity and our full fired up adult selves. And that is what's going to be required for moving ahead, but it's also what we've been aching for as humans for so, so long. So ultimately, collapse is a gift that we didn't know we needed. So I know our time's up, but I figure I should probably end on that note.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you, BuzzBooks, for having us.
Yeah, thank you, BuzzBooks, and thank you, Amy, for being my publisher.
Thank you to both of you, and I appreciate it. The book is called I Eat the Stars, How to Live Fully and Beautifully in a Collapsing World by Sarah Wilson, and it's, of course, published by Penguin Life on June 16th. And I also want to say, I know that this began on Substack, and in reading it, I saw that it weaves together the existential and the everyday. And you said that it was a call to stay awake, to stay kind, to stay radically human as the world shifts around us. And I also did want to call out the poem because it really, really, I don't know if you got the idea to do the book when you read the poem, but it's very beautiful. And it really, I think, does what you're asking it to do. So
Thank you,
I
Mary
hope
Ann.
everyone gets a chance to read the book. It's really fantastic.
And I'll just add something small to that. Rebecca Elson's estate very kindly gave me permission to run the poem because they felt that the book and the subject matter was in line with her thinking. And the cover is a strange cover, but that would be because I designed it. And I designed all of my covers.
Our next conversation, North of Ordinary, How One Woman Left It All Behind for Wilderness and Wonder in Alaska's Frozen Frontier by Sue Aikens. And this is Sourcebooks, March 10th. So coming up pretty quickly.
Right. Thank you so much.
Hey.
So, hi, Sue.
Hi.
So, everybody, fans across the world know Sue Aikens as one of the most recognizable faces of the hit show Life Below Zero. If she looks familiar, that's probably why. But the story of Sue and Alaska starts decades before she was ever on TV, and I have to say is even more fascinating than the elements of her life that you get to see on camera. So, Sue, how are you tonight?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
A little technologically challenged, but overcoming it.
But we're all here.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd start off with kind of a fun note because one of my very favorite things about working with Sue is getting texts from her with pictures of the wildlife that she's seen out of her window. So what animals have you seen today and what is the weather like in Alaska?
Right now we're having it's such a large state. There's a lot of climate happening all over the state. Where I'm at what I call the Chena cabin. And if you read the book, this location has a lot to do with when I first came to Alaska. But I'm sitting here at like 8 above zero. So it's fairly balmy for me right now. Good enough that I could get on my roofs and knock down a lot of the snow. I had 5 foot of snow, so I had to get that all off of my roofs. But I have late last night, early this morning, it was kind of funny. I'm trying to lay in bed and I have a little dog. He's just a couple of pounds of fun here. That's Bill. But I have a wolf pack. And it's not that large. It's only between 4 and 6 of them. But I'm laying there with Bill in the bed, and all of a sudden I hear this just shrill, shrieking howl. And it was right next to our heads where I have a porch. And the little guy here starts calling back, calling back, trying to match that tone. And I'm like, no, cut it. No, dude. We're inside normally in Kavik. When I'm up on the North Slope, I live in a tent. It's just one of the codicils for me to be there is I cannot have a permanent structure. Being challenge oriented, hey, not a problem. If you say I have to live in a tent for the last 25, 30 years, that's great with me. If that's all you've got, you weren't much of a challenge. But so the wolf pack was in and he needed to go outside. I'm like, there's no danger, man. You are a Scooby snack. But then we have a marten. It's a pine marten. It's a part of the weasel family, but he's about this big around and maybe 3-4 feet long. He's huge. And he's decided he's living in my woods. And he decides to come on the porch. He hears us in here. And again, Bill thinks, great, I've got a friend, But I have a lot of birds of prey. I have a raven. When I first came to Alaska, and I found myself alone. Don't want to share too much of the story yet. My mom abandoned me when I was real young up here. And the first animal that came to me was a raven. Now up here, they're 2 to 3 feet tall. I was a lot smaller back then. But it protected me. It showed me where food was. When I needed shelter, it led me to this spot, which is an older woman I purchased. And they say you can't ever go home again. BS. Work a little harder, buy it back. You can't live back then, but one of the buildings on this place saved my life back then. So I did it the return and I saved its life later on.
That's amazing. So that's just a snapshot of what life is like in Alaska for Sue. So I would say that it's safe to say you have more experience sharing your life with an outside audience than most first-time memoir writers since you've been on reality TV for such a long time. What made you decide that you wanted to write your story to share with the world?
I think throughout my life at different levels, people, oh my gosh, how many times do we tell this to people? Oh my gosh, you're so interesting. You should write a book. And I'm like, yeah, there's a whole lot of ego maybe involved in that. And I wasn't quite sure that was where I wanted to put my energy. And actually,
one of my grandchildren. She was watching an episode and she looks at me and she looks again. Now you got to understand, we had 23 seasons of the show. So you get to see me much younger with waist long hair, buzzed it all off. I donate it to kids with cancer. I help a lot of people in need. It's a renewable resource. What do I care if it take it to the scalp, you know? But one of my granddaughters looked and she looked at me and she says, "You really do that?" And I was like, "Oh, wow. You really have no idea who I am." You know, and the book is a very good way. There's not one person on this planet that I know of that makes it out of this gig alive. So I wanted her to read who I was, not who somebody else thought I should be.
And would you say that in that process of writing the book, you had a lot more control over telling your story than you have?
Personally, I have very little control. You asked me what animals I saw, and I told you about 14 other things. I have a very childlike brain. I suppose when I was younger, you know, they put you in the special learning area. Whether you were a savant or you ate crayons, it didn't matter. You went into that area. I think in pictures and moving things, it can sometimes be difficult to relate. It took me years to get this written. How do you tell? You're going to see and hear so many stories. Hopefully I tell it in a way that you see it with me.
Absolutely.
But
I think
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say the picture that you paint on the page of Alaska is incredibly compelling. I mean, it really, this is like so cliche to say in the book world. Sorry, guys, but Alaska really functions as a character in the story. And one of the things that I think you do so well is balance illustrating, you know, the remote nature of your life in Alaska, because often you're alone, right? And sort of, you know, throughout your life.
Yeah.
But you also really show the humanity and the relationships that have, you know, made you the person that you are, and balancing those two things of like showing the solitude and sort of the austereness of the setting with the relationships that have to drive any human story is really compelling. I'm just curious if you have any sort of further thoughts about that, you know, those two sides of your life and how that comes through in the book.
There's a gentleman that helped me. He is a ghostwriter to help me put my thoughts. A lot of my thoughts is verbal and it's coming at you 400 miles an hour. In life, the things that happen to us, we're not going to be judged by what we did. We're not going to be judged by what happened to us, but how we reacted to it. So for me, was there a violent upbringing? Absolutely. Was that a product of the times? Yeah, there was a lot of people that had, you know, spanking, this, that was a thing. But how do you overcome it? Do you carry it like a freaking burden so you can, the next person, you're going to hold it against them because you had something happen? What's in your past? Example, my daughter, her first marriage failed and she was just bummed out one day. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she says, "Well, I kind of want to date again, but I bring so much baggage." And I said, "Set that Gucci shit down. You only have baggage in life if you pick it up. So set it down, own your portion of it. I don't care what happened. If it's in your lap, you have some real estate. Look at it honestly and go, yep, that's done. If you cannot affect change, you cannot carry it with you. Close that suitcase, put it under the bed. That's a portion of your life. There's no heat on in that building. Walk away." I think in all the renditions that I went through on how to write the book, what was important to me, I was worried at first, how do I tell everything and make people see through my eyes? And you can't. I don't even remember everything at any one time, but I think it fashioned itself into, yes, this happened. Yes, my mother was one of the most intelligent women, beautiful women you'd ever want to meet, and one of the cruelest. At a point in my life when she brought me to Alaska and then says, "Hey, what do you want from town? I'm going to get something." My first thought was, I want to go with. This was news to me. There was never a birthday party. There was never gifts. But that didn't happen, and she never came back. At that juncture, as a human, I could have held it against her. and tell it later on in a way, 50 years later, man, this person was a jerk. But instead, throughout my life, I don't pretend to understand what takes a basic good human and has them be the way they are. All I can do is the ground underneath my own feet and the space between my own ears. I didn't forgive her because it wasn't about forgiveness. It's like when I finally realized, oh my God, she's not coming back. At first it was alone. I'm all alone. I'm in the Alaskan wilderness alone as a child. And then I went, oh my God, I'm alone. I don't have to deal with all the other stuff. In a weird way, yes. Do I love my mother? Yes. Did I see her again later in life? Absolutely. Read the book. But I never held it against her. I don't know what it was she went through to make her the way she was. Absolutely had a nervous breakdown or whatever. But it enabled me, if I change any one thing about my entire past, even this morning's, I'm not the person you see in front of you. And I'm a hell of a lot of fun to hang with. I like myself. I have skills that I can't. When I was in New York City, they do these things, Sue in the City, throw me in a city, and I'm like, oh my God, here's 37 feet wide of bodies coming at you as soon as that light changes. And I cannot look at that ocean of people and pick out the Jeffrey Dahmer. Can't do it. Humans are not the same. An animal is instinctual, and I can guarantee you, if I see a bear coming across the tundra, I can take one look at him and I know he's coming in peace. He's not coming in peace. Holy shit, I got 2 seconds. Animals are my comfort zone. We don't control anything except what's between our own 2 ears and where we put our 2 feet. And that's what's important to share.
Thank you so much, Sue. If that doesn't compel everybody on the call to read the book, I'm not sure what will. So I think we're out of time, but thank you so much. And thank you, BuzzBooks, for having us. I hope you all pick up North of Ordinary because it is amazing.
And shameless plug, there we go. And one other thing, people had asked me, if you look at the cover, here I am. I've got my beautiful gray hair. I have a neck brace on. I just fused. I've had several spinal surgeries because of a bear attack. I survived a bear attack, but we had to fuse the neck. But life goes on, nothing waits. And so the picture we chose, you have the beauty and the majesty of Alaska behind you, but who is Sue? I've got the neck brace on, my hunting jacket on, and I'm walking determinedly into my future.
Wow.
Thank you for having me on.
That's incredible. And I also wanted to share, well, first of all, that was incredible. And reading the book was also incredible. Your story is just so riveting and inspirational. And it makes sense that on the nomination form, your publisher said that it's described as The Glass Castle meets John Krakauer. And I also wanted to share that they included this bookseller quote from your appearance at PNBA, which was, Sue's talk at PNBA had everyone in a trance. When she was finished, the whole audience craved even more stories and humor from her. So that was Alexa Butler from Beach Books in Oregon. So
oh, cool.
Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. And here's the beautiful cover again, North of Ordinary. All right. So now we are moving to The End of My Life is Killing Me by Annabelle Gurwitch with Kathleen Harris. And here it is in person, but you can see it on the screen. It's coming from Zibby Books in March 17th. And Annabelle, your book is so powerful and moving and also funny. I thought I would share this quote from Henry Alford that you had, which seemed to sum it up. With this hilarious and poignant book, the great Annabelle Gurwitch proves that inspirational literature can be spiky and fun and prone to sentences like, juicers are the Waterford crystal bowls of the newly diagnosed. What doesn't kill her makes her funnier. All hail. So all hail. Annabelle Gurwitch is an actress, activist, and a New York Times bestselling author of 6 books and a 2-time Thurber Prize finalist. Her essays and satire have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and many other places. Annabelle co-hosted the fan favorite Dinner and a Movie on TBS and was a regular commentator on NPR. And Kathleen Harris is an executive editor at Zibby Publishing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm Kathleen Harris, executive editor at Zibby Publishing, and I'm so happy to be here with Annabelle Gurwitch. About 2 years ago, Annabelle was on a panel at an event we hosted, and she literally blew me away. She had the entire audience cackling. There was no topic off limits. She literally stole the show. And then cut to many months later when we received a book proposal from her for her latest work, and I leapt out of my chair. I was so excited for it. And then I read the title, The End of My Life is Killing Me, and my heart broke a little bit. And I learned that Annabelle had an unexpected diagnosis of stage 4 lung cancer. And my first thought was, how was she going to write about this? Would this be funny? Would this be Annabelle? And the answer is most certainly yes. What I love so much about this book is that it surprises you at every turn. It has Annabelle's signature wit, humor, crazy stories like going on her tour with her boyfriend's band to sell merch in Europe, or starting a ukulele band of her own. But then there's also vulnerability and compassion. And this book has made me laugh and cry and really be inspired to live. And as we've been talking a lot about positioning for this book, we keep coming back to this line that Annabelle loves to say, that it's a book of small rescues against despair, which I absolutely love. So Annabelle, tell us a little bit more about that and how you think this book accomplishes that mission.
Oh, Kathleen, that makes me so happy to hear you say that. And thank you so much. And I just want to say, first of all, I'm just so moved hearing Sarah and Sue talk about their work. I love this kind of talk. And Sue, it's just funny you said about writing taking some ego. I just want to say I find writing so humbling that what I have behind me in my bookcase is I've displayed the books that I was reading while I was writing, because I'm so humbled by all of these amazing books, and they inspired me so much and challenged me at every moment to stick to the mission I was writing to. So, Kathleen, when I started this book started with a completely different theme. The theme of this book originally was I was writing in the first couple years, the first 2 years. It was supposed to span 2 years after I was diagnosed just out of the blue with this terminal illness. And the book was a question. The question was, could I accept the reality of my situation with some kind of a joy? Could I keep living in some way? There's a phrase by Otto Rank, who was a disciple of Jung, the volitional acceptance of the obligatory. And that's the idea of making your peace with what is actually happening. But the key is volitional, to have agency in that, not just like, I'm slouching my way to, live through my life, which is very tempting, and nothing wrong with slouching. I do a lot of slouching, all for slouching. But so the original book that I wrote at 2 years after this experience that I was writing all along, and I was publishing these pieces, started with the piece in the New York Times. It does end in this moment in Paris. I don't know, spoiler alert, but I did sign on to sell merch on a low rent van tour of Europe with a guy we had never farted in front of each other. We had barely begun seeing each other, and I signed up for this to tour with this heavy metal band and sell their merch. I find myself in Paris. This was the end of the book, because I felt I had been able to achieve this goal that the book was about. And as I was editing the book to get it ready for submission to bring out to the world, I outlived my prognosis. I outlived the ending of this book. And an even more challenging question came. And that was, what do you do when you outlive your expiration point that you had made your peace with? And this is where this idea came that I needed to cultivate an appreciation of everyday joys, Sadly, my budget doesn't allow me to live every day in Paris, and every day is not going to be the peak moment. And so this question of cultivating everyday joys, of small rescues against existential despair, that became the theme. And an editor's nightmare. Now I have two different books. And hi, Kathleen. Here you go. And I think that the challenge of this book has been to then take material that I was already attached to, and as a writer, I can work so hard on a sentence, and then I feel really good about it. But a sentence that I've published in an essay in the New York Times doesn't always fit my new theme in this book. And so then I have to let go of that, and you have to wrestle it away from me. I mean, it sounds so silly. I'm not encountering a bear in the wilderness, but if I am, Sue, I would like your number on speed dial, because I could not tell a bear with malintent from a bear who was just happened to be, slouching by. So I need to know, Sue, because it could happen. And unlikely, but you never know. Life is so unexpected. So this was the challenge in this book. And so then the book became a book about these small rescues. And what's been really fun for me is, and I love what Henry said. He's one of my favorite authors. I loved his latest book, I Dream of Joni, about Joni Mitchell. I was that girl, sang Joni Mitchell in my bedroom. There's a little story about that in this book. But each story, each chapter of the book, even though it's stories, I like having these takeaway values come through stories. I learn best through stories. So in each story is built around one of these strategies. You mentioned like the band. So my friends and I, that's a little chapter I'll just speak about, a little chapter about the regular calendaring of getting together with friends, which is a strategy called a Stammtisch. That's a German word for a regulars table. And my little Stammtisch, getting together every week with my friends, was such a sustaining strategy for me, having something to look forward to in this, when you're facing something that's such a huge challenge, these existential challenges, having these small, affordable moments to look forward to is so important. And ours turned into the worst ukulele band in the history of ukulele bands. You'd think, how hard can it be? There are 4 strings. What's so hard about a ukulele? Amazingly, we got worse and worse. So the name of our band became Flowers for Algernon, that terrible book that was published in the 1970s about a man and a rat who lose their greater intelligence. Really, people hated children in the 70s. They gave them this book, and we named our band that. And we are available for bar mitzvahs, other occasions where you want people to leave early.
Oh, you're selling yourself short, Annabelle. But I think you bring up an interesting point about the genesis of this book and how it kind of lives above genre. It's part memoir, part social commentary, it's humor, it's essays, but there's also real life advice for those struggling with illness. Will Schwabe said in his endorsement, he called it a Trojan horse of a book. It's a memoir that's chock full of wisdom and strategies for better living, somewhere between memoir and self-help. So talk a little bit about that too. Like, how did you want to use this book, obviously, to tell your story and impart humor, but also give people some real life advice who are going through similar situations as you?
Oh, thank you for asking that. I'm not really interested in me. I'm interested in ideas. I just have, unlikely things happen to me. I mean, the story of how I got diagnosed was like a zombie apocalypse rom-com. So, I went in for a scan when I was getting I went in for a COVID test in a little mini mall urgent care. I got talked into a scan that I only got talked into because the doctor was cute. I thought he had a thing for older women. I thought he was flirting with me. I mean, these ridiculous things happened to me, but I'm interested in ideas. And so each each chapter is built around an idea. So during the pandemic, and this was an idea I had had prior to diagnosis, but then really I wanted to explore in the after that, and also during the pandemic, was I started this podcast called Tiny Victories. And it was a kind of practice. And I just want to say, I don't use the word practice or journey or mindfulness in this book because I want to punch people when they use those words. I'm just like, I have this allergy to self-help. However, I have a lot of practices and mindfulness things, but I just I find these very popular terms difficult. So in that podcast, and what I talk about in the book is this little practice developed. People do gratitude practices, and sometimes you just don't feel like there are things to be grateful for. However, and so that wasn't working for me. But what was sustaining me was this idea that I would look for something, one tiny thing that would get me through the day, a tiny victory. And a tiny victory might be as small as learning a new word. I love words. The word inflorescence came into my life when I got this amazing wallpaper with this flowered wallpaper. I was like, inflorescence. I just had so much pleasure saying this word. And sometimes I think, we are facing such difficult things. We have to remember to go really tiny and really, really find something that helps sustain us. And it might be a word. And so in each chapter, there is a takeaway value. And I just want to say there's even a takeaway value in this amazing cover, because we're talking about covers, right? And designing covers. I always say I'm terrible at design. I have no idea what a cover should be, but I had an idea for this cover. And the idea for this cover was, in the book, I write about turning to who I call the it girls of Greek mythology. I have shunned Instagram. Instead, I've gone straight for Persephone and Daphne and Ovid's Metamorphosis. And there are so much to be learned from these ancient female figures. And I became obsessed with Daphne, the story of Daphne and Apollo, because Daphne is the only character, the only person in Ovid's Metamorphosis who actually has agency in her transformation. There's a lot of transformations in that book. When she becomes a laurel tree, she calls out for transformation. I was obsessed with Daphne and Bernini's sculpture, Apollo and Daphne. Daphne is in the process of turning into a laurel tree. And I knew Bernini's sculpture had to be on the cover of my book. I'm a humorist. Now I'm going to have a book with this, classic Baroque statue. I was so excited about this. And it's a chicken doing yoga. And Kathleen has sent, what do you think? And this is the takeaway lesson, which is just that you think you want Bernini and a Baroque statue, but what life gives you is a baby chicken doing yoga. And what are you going to do? I wrote back and I said, love it.
Wow. I'm sorry to jump in. I'm going to infloresce my way in here. Annabelle, that was terrific. And Kathleen, thank you so much. It was very wonderful. I appreciate it. All right. So this is a song for the hard-hit people, a memoir of anti-racist solidarity from a coal miner's daughter by Beth Howard, coming out from Haymarket on April 11th. And I can hold it up because I'm done with the blurring thing. It's very beautiful. Beth, it has been so great getting to know your story and your work and reading about how you organize with love and solidarity, as you say in your book, and also what it took you to get there. It's really beautiful and powerful. So Beth Howard is the cultural strategist for Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURGE, the largest national organization bringing white people into the fight for racial and economic justice. She grew up in a rural white working class community in Eastern Kentucky and has organized in the American South for 2 decades, primarily in her beloved home state of Kentucky. Songs for Hard Hit People is our first book, and you can find her on Substack at Working Class Love Notes. And Eric Kerl is a Kentuckian living, working, organizing, and writing in Chicago.
Hey there. Hey, everybody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric, one of the editors here at Haymarket Books. And first, to just say a tremendous thank you to Publishers Marketplace and Buzz Books for having us tonight. I wanted to open up tonight by maybe Beth and my sort of meeting story. And I think it's a really interesting entree into the genesis of this book. And I don't know if I've told you this story, Beth, but I had been following your work as a sort of movement organizer for quite some time, but I became very aware of you around 2020 when you wrote the essay, Rednecks for Black Lives. And it was just, a couple of months after the murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, and I think just a matter of weeks after George Floyd in Minneapolis, right? And it was, I don't even know if it was 700 words. It was a very short essay. But somehow in that small number of words, you were able to put forward both a call to action, a love letter, a history lesson. All of those things sort of rolled into one tight little essay. It was extraordinarily human. It was deeply compassionate, but it was also provocative. It was unflinching, and it took a really principled position on the questions of racism and how we go about organizing in our communities. And I remember feeling as a Kentuckian that this was both a revelation to me, that there was many of us out there, and a vindication of some of those histories and experiences that many of us had, like growing up in rural areas and in Kentucky. And so I wanted to thank you for that. And I think that it's very much my expectation that this book and your work here is going to be exponential in that project in terms of rooting a sort of compassionate sense of how we organize, defend ourselves, reinstill a sense of pride, and fight for that world that working class people really deserve. I think that that's really important. So thank you for that. I'm forever a Beth Howard partisan.
Likewise, I got you.
But I wanted to talk about that question of that word redneck, right? Because it's a loaded word. It has lots of baggage, and it's been used in all kinds of different ways. And I think that we are used to the way that media and all sorts of things have put forward degrading stereotypes and caricatures of rural people, especially Appalachian people, from Jethro and the Beverly Hillbillies to, the sort of unhinged violence of Deliverance, and even in J.D. Vance's own Hillbilly Elegy, right? But the characters that are in your book are obviously real and much more complex. And somehow you're able to tease out all of the contradictions of relationships and community and people. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that and why you chose the sort of form of memoir to think out loud and talk with people about those ideas, who we are and who we can be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, for being in this with me, and so excited to be on this panel today. I wanted to tell a story because I think that, as we all probably believe here, that stories really move us, that we're changed by stories, and that by telling a story, for a reader, someone maybe listening to an audiobook, that it will be so much more impactful than just me kind of, giving out data or research. So I wanted to tell a story and show that I'm committed to racial justice because I'm from Appalachia and not in spite of it. And, also because it was never one person or, one moment, but an entire lifetime that made me, have this commitment. And so, I wanted to show, we talked about the word redneck. We are often in Appalachia, or many Southerners, kind of portrayed as a caricature, as, the hillbilly kind of stereotype. And we're often scapegoated also as kind of being the reason we can't have nice things in this country, right? Or that all the racism in the country only exists in the South, right? And we know that's not true. And so I think in this story, I really wanted to debunk a lot of those stereotypes, but I also wanted to be careful and not swing too far the other way and kind of pretend that we're perfect and that we don't have any problems here. So I wanted to show us as we really are, which I think is just as all humans are, complex, nuanced people that can hold multiple realities and multiple opinions, and that we are constantly surprising people and, breaking those stereotypes wide open. And that, we have a very important, very inspiring, and very hidden history here of actually a lot of working class white people fighting on the right side of social justice, racial justice, worker issues, and coming together across racial lines to do so. And so, the concept of a redneck, one of the meanings and one of the really important themes that we draw out in this book and stories is the story of the 10,000 strong multiracial redneck army in 1921 in the Battle of Blair Mountain in West Virginia. And so the word redneck and that symbol of the red bandana they wore around their neck to show that they were in solidarity is such an important part of us and such an important part of our history, and something that we all need to call on ourselves so much, today, more than maybe ever in my lifetime, right? And so I think sometimes when we talk about white people in the South or in Appalachia, it's often through the frame of what we need to do to change, to be completely different than who we are, right? And then we would be a worthy person. And so, it is true just like everywhere else. Of course, we struggle with racism, and of course we have shortcomings, and we have things that we want to change and transform. But we're also brilliant and powerful, and we have this incredible history of solidarity. And so I don't want us to completely change and be different. I want us to tap into that very real part of us and bring that forward, right? I want us to be the best of who we are. And so that's what I hope this book does, is it shows readers, it shows people across the country who we are, but it also reflects back to us how beautiful and powerful that we are and what a role we have to play right now.
Excellent. I'm going to try to kind of combine a couple of questions here for us. One of the things that you described early on in the book is a meet cute that you have that really sort of ignites your trajectory toward becoming a community organizer. I think there's an earlier moment in your memoir, and that is the infamous lunchroom struggle with Danita. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that question of what continued to inspire you to become a community organizer. Are there inspirations that you look to? How do you understand that relationship with writing and community organizing and doing those two things sort of simultaneously? And then one other thing to sort of throw in there, because I think that one of the hallmarks of a good organizer is the idea that you can change things, right? That's the sort of driving force of it. And one of the blurbs for the book, Angela Davis says, this book will make you cry, laugh, think, and feel, but most of all, it will leave you hopeful. I'm hoping that you could speak to those questions of like the driving force of being an organizer, how writing relates to that, and that question of hope.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up wanting to be a writer. I was an avid reader. I'm a Southerner, so you ask us a simple, straightforward question, and we're going to answer it by telling you a story, And so I think for me, I wanted to be a writer, but I came into community organizing because my life, like so many people in this country, was one made up of struggle, of my family trying to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. And I thought we deserved better. I still think we deserve better. And I was willing to fight for it and to bring other people into that fight. And I think being a community organizer and being a writer is actually a really beautiful combination, because in order to be a good community organizer, you have to build relationships with people. And in order, I think, to be a good writer is to really make people come alive. And so after years of being a practiced listener, to be curious about people. It's helped me, I hope, bring them alive on the page. And I think about, in the book, as you read it, you learn snippets about Appalachian and Southern organizing history and movements. And a really important part of our history here in our lineage is the Hollander Center in East Tennessee, which has been a training school for the civil rights movement and all kinds of movements and organizations for justice. And the founder of the Hollander Center, Miles Horton, he used to talk about seeing people with two eyes. And he was especially using this when he was talking about organizing white Southerners who were racist or who were in the Klan, and organizing them away from that ideology and into working class solidarity. And he said, you have to see people with two eyes. You have to see them very clearly for who they are right now, and then you have to see them as the person that they can become. And I feel like I've tried to write this book with two eyes, right? To look very clearly about where I come from and who I am and who my people are, and the very real threats that we are facing today. And with the other eye towards the future and towards who we can become, who I can change and become, who I've already, transformed so many times in my own people and see their trajectory of growth. And I think that gets into the question of hope, right? Dr. Angela Davis is somebody that was an organizer and a writer and a thought leader, and she is a model for me. And it means a lot to me that she said my book was hopeful. And I think for me, there's this organizing axiom that if you feel hopeless or you feel confused, to pick up a clipboard, go knock on a door and talk to somebody. And, to be a writer, I'm probably share this with many people. I'm also pretty introverted, and so every time that I'm going to talk to someone new or go meet someone for the first time, it's kind of like jumping in a swimming pool and the water's so cold. But then after I do it, I'm like, the water's great. Come on in, right? I'm so glad I'm here. And that's exactly how I feel every time that I talk to someone, is that I feel connected to people. I'm reminded of the hope that I have in people, the love that I have for people, and the place that I come from. And so I think in this book that readers get to meet so many people, so many complex, beautiful, nuanced people. And I believe that never giving up hope and our belief in the future, and to see that there are people, working class, rural people, white, black, and brown, coming together every day and fighting for a future together where we all get what we deserve, which is a roof over our heads, food on the table, and to feel safe and loved and cared for.
Wow, Beth, that is incredible. Thank you so much. And seeing a lot of great reactions, as we have been the whole panel. The Killer and Frank Lloyd Wright, the true story of mass murder in paradise by Casey Sherman, which is Sourcebooks in May 26th. So Casey, as someone who has been a fan of Frank Lloyd Wright's and seen all the histories that barely give a passing glance to this story, this book was such an eye-opener. I was just talking to my daughter about it too. I won't get into the details, since I'm sure you will in a moment, but your publisher said that your writing falls into the nonfiction that reads like fiction category that readers and retailers are also hungry for, and I agree. So Casey Sherman is a New York Times bestselling author of nearly 20 books spanning true crime and narrative nonfiction. His work includes The Finest Hours and Patriot's Day, both adapted into major motion pictures, and true crime favorite Helltown, now in development as a limited series for Amazon Studios. And Sherman is currently starring in NBC Peacock's The Boston Strangler, Unheard Confession. The Killer and Frank Lloyd Wright is in development as a feature film to star Leonardo DiCaprio. And Angela Corpus is Director of Marketing for Adult Nonfiction at Sourcebooks.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here tonight. I'm Angela, and thrilled to get to share a conversation with Casey Sherman with you all tonight. Thank you, Buzz Books, for having us. So I've gotten to work with Casey on a few books now, and he doesn't just unravel a case for readers. He's truly a storyteller that draws you in to the heart of the action and paints a full picture of everything going on. And when we do our marketing calls, sometimes I have to make myself go back to our agenda so that we actually get something accomplished in our calls, because I could just listen to him talk and explain more about the story all day long. So Casey, tell us briefly in your own words, what is The Killer and Frank Lloyd Wright about?
Oh, The Killer and Frank Lloyd Wright basically is Romeo and Juliet meet The Shining. Frank Lloyd Wright, the world's most prolific architect, was involved in a mass murder early in his architectural career that really shifted his entire way that he designed buildings and the way that he lived his life. It's a story about bucking the trend of Edwardian society in the early 1900s. Here was Frank Lloyd Wright. When we meet him in my book, he is a brilliant young man, but he is strapped down by a mother who is overly possessive, a family life that he is constraining him intellectually and creatively. And he falls in love outside of his marriage and meets a young woman named Mamie Borthwick, who you'll meet in the book, who's an incredibly accomplished young woman in her own right. She is also married with children, and they decide to fall in love. And by that, I mean they don't do it behind closed doors. They do it in front of just about everybody, including their own families, and it triggers the first celebrity sex scandal in American history.
Absolutely riveting. And you know, from the first page, you jump into the action, and I can't wait for everyone to be able to read this. And you're a veteran journalist, best-selling true crime writer. How did you come to this story, and what made you want to write this book?
Great question, Angela. I call myself the accidental author. I never believed I'd be writing books one day, but that is until I was thrust into the spotlight because of my work on one case, one of the biggest cases in the history of American crime, the case of the Boston Strangler. My aunt, 19-year-old Mary Sullivan, was the youngest and final victim of that notorious 1960s murder spree. I was a young journalist at the time when I found out about my family connection. I reinvestigated the case. And Angela, you become so close to these cases. When I investigated the Strangler case, I had to exhume the so-called killer Albert DeSalvo's remains for DNA testing. I've actually held his skull in my hands.
Oh, wow.
And what that allowed me to do as a writer is to look, touch, and feel it. What that allowed me to do as a family member is to have that built-in empathy. I know what tragedy looks like because my family's been there. So when I decided to write this story, I didn't really know much about Frank Lloyd Wright at the beginning, but I was in Hollywood doing a pitch meeting with Leo DiCaprio's production company for another book. And they told me about Frank Lloyd Wright. And they said they were about to start a documentary about this sensational case, but they didn't have a Casey Sherman to dig under the weeds and find a real story there. And Angela, I said, well, I'm right here. You might have a Casey Sherman. Let me go back to my writing lab here. Let me see if there's a real story here. And I went back, and not only did I find a story about murder, but more importantly, Angela, I found a story about love. And that really is the undercurrent of this sensational crime that happened in 1914 in the Midwest of the United States.
Absolutely wild ride. So I love that it actually came from your pitch meeting with Leonardo DiCaprio. So it was mentioned in your bio, but there's been a lot of buzz in Hollywood around this book. Is there anything you can announce to us or share with us?
Sure. It's crazy. I told Leo's company that I was going to write the book, and I did so, and I sent the manuscript to them, but I also said, look, I'm going to give that to my reps at UTA, and they're going to see who the best fit ultimately is for this project. And I remember going out to Hollywood last year, and for the first time in my career, even though I've had success in Hollywood, my reps are saying, Casey, you've got the leverage in every room because there are so many Frank Lloyd Wright fans in Hollywood, whether it's Brad Pitt, Seth Rogen with the studio, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. So I did the circuit, and I met with them all. And finally, at the end of the week, I had my meeting with Leo and his team, and it just made the right fit to take this journey from idea to the page and ultimately to the screen. So we're very excited. Leonardo DiCaprio has just been nominated for another Best Actor Oscar, has taken control of this project. And knock on wood, hopefully he's going to be starring as Frank in the big screen adaptation of this book.
Absolutely incredible. And the way you write, and it's even just from the very start, you can see how this could be shown cinematically. It's so vivid.
It is so vivid. And to your point, I wanted to bring the reader right into the action. In the prologue, it doesn't start, with Frank's, biographical story. It starts with the smoke and fire at this beautiful compound that he built for love. It was called Taliesin in Wisconsin, and he built it to basically train the next generation of architect, but also he built it for the love of his life, this woman that he had fallen in love with, that they eventually go into exile in Europe together, but come back and decide we're going to live our lives on our own terms. And that's what they decide to do. Meanwhile, clergy, the yellow press, everybody in America was pointing their finger at this couple and basically, demonizing them for living their lives, being true to themselves. Truth against the world is the motto that Frank Lloyd Wright's forefathers used. And it certainly was the motto that he lived by. But of course, that there is tragedy that's just around the corner with this story. Frank Lloyd Wright can't get everything, meaning he can't get his beautiful career. He can't get the love of his life, not in that time and place. And of course, what happens is an explosion of tragedy, a fire that is set at Taliesin, the victims who are all trying to climb out of windows to escape, including his beloved Mamah Borthwick and her two young children, are then cut down by a killer with an axe. When I mentioned The Shining, there's our Jack Torrance character come to real life. And that type of tragedy would have destroyed anybody. And it certainly destroyed Frank for a good portion of the rest of his life. But I also was looking for what's the heart of Frank's story? What is his redemption story here? So Frank eventually goes into exile in Japan, where he is ordered by the Japanese emperor to design a building to house foreign dignitaries. This is the early 1920s. And when he gets there, he starts to feel these tremors, and he understands that the topsoil or the ground is very volatile in Japan. So he builds the world's first earthquake-resistant building. And what that means to the story, and I can't wait for you all to read it, the monument to death that Frank had built at Taliesin in Wisconsin then becomes the monument to life that he builds in Japan that saves so many people's lives.
Incredible. And just the way you take readers through that is just riveting. So
and Frank can get out of his own way for for most of the book. He keeps getting himself into these situations, not only with Mamah Borthwick, but with so many other women in his life. And part of, my journey as a journalist, I explored all of the news reports that were written at that time. So I got to see how journalists were reporting on this. And Frank was so open and living his life, not behind closed doors, but really pointing, thumbing his nose, if you will, to the structures of society. And I got to see how the relationship between Frank and Mamah was painted in the press. And, they were basically the Ben Affleck and J-Lo of 1914. They were shocking to me at how famous they became because of their relationship, and then how tragic that ultimately became as well.
And the way that you show that, so this is about a property, this is about, the true crime aspect of the whole story, but then also you learn so much about Frank Lloyd Wright himself through your storytelling here. So we are at time. So is there anything final that you'd like to tell us that you hope we all take away from the book?
Yeah, I would just say, you're going to meet Frank Lloyd Wright, but you're also going to meet Mamah Borthwick, a young, independent, feminist, incredible person in her own right. And, to Mary Ann's point, Frank's biographers really kind of skated over this story because I think it was, too scandalous for them to even write about. And I don't think they gave Mamah Borthwick her agency as a person. And I hope that people that read this book will come out of it, as my own daughters will, knowing that this was an incredible, young, independent woman who was looking to change history in her own right, before she was tragically taken from us.
Thank
Wow.
you so much, Casey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, everybody.